This Sovereign Isle, Britain in and Out of Europe, published in 2011 by Alan Lane, written by Robert Toombs. If you voted in the Brexit referendum, this book will annoy you at some point, which is probably a good way of saying it shows all sides of the argument. It has a point of view. The writer states that right at the beginning, and if you disagree with that point at the beginning, I would say stick with this book. It's a history of Europe and Britain. The first chapter spans 3 millennia from 3000 BC till about the 50s, and the next 6 go over the last 50 years. Britain's relationship with the EU and its predecessors, and kind of the ins and outs of that. Outside of the major names, I don't really know much modern European history, especially the political ins and outs of the European project. And this does a very good job at being an easy read to introduce you to that, and why Britain had problems in Europe throughout its time in it. I read this book in a day, which is fairly unusual for me. Usually it takes me a good few weeks at least to read something, so that probably tells you about how easy it is to read. The history, especially of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, is very interesting because I know very little about it. And it's a good introduction if you want to know a little bit more about European integration and its history, even if you don't care about the Brexity sides of things. The more modern stuff is interesting to read. Certainly the things that happened over the last few years. Those were the bits that I probably disagreed with his interpretations the most. He's writing the first draft of history. We don't know really the consequences of this thing that happened this year. But for something I've lived through viscerally, living in Holland throughout the last, coming up on 2 years now, it's very interesting to have a retrospective of it and think how things that seem so important at the time now have such little consequence. He also tries to predict the future a little as well. The last chapter is looking ahead at where Britain and Europe's place in the world might be in the next half century or so. He has some interesting ideas on there, and kind of, but not just a single one, giving options of what might happen if certain decisions are made. Wherever you stand on this issue, whether you know a load about it and are passionate or don't really know much, this is well worth a read on a lazy weekend.